It's always fun getting the crowd back. Thank you for rejoining us. So as all of you who are upstairs at breakfast know, I'm Mark McCaffrey. I'm the TMT leader for the firm, and the guy who clings the glass to get everybody's attention. I didn't give me a glass this time with a fork. And Michelle, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Cool. Hi, I'm Michelle Castillo. I'm a reporter at CNBC. I cover internet culture, advertising, media. So this entire report is up my alley.
And speaking of technology, what about the studio, right? Is this pretty cool or what, right? Who would have thought years ago PwC would have their own studio in here? I'm just doing a little shout out for the group back there. It's kind of amazing.
So yeah, I thought the report was fascinating from a lot of different perspectives. I wanted to start out by pointing out that you guys found that you felt that entertainment and media growth is it's going to be pretty stagnant or pretty it's not really increasing or decreasing, and the one thing that we really need is some kind of groundbreaking technology. People on average, according to Nielsen, spend 10 hours and 39 minutes a day consuming media. So if you factor in 8 hours of sleep, there's only 4 hours to do actual work or, I don't know, take a shower or do anything else like that. So there's really not much time left to increase your media consumption unless there is a disruptive technology, and as the report suggested, driverless cars. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that.
It's a great theory. Profitability will go up, but production in the workforce will have to go down because there's no other time to watch content. But I think, and just for the record, Deborah said that someone says everybody's a tech company. That's me, right? I think everybody deep down inside is a tech company, and definitely wants some of the tech valuations, just on a side note. But you have to look at, what is technology going to do? I think the group before did a great job of talking about everything that's going on, but we're living a bit of a story right now, right? We have our own epic drama of the content producers, the providers, and then ultimately the users, and how is this all going to play out? And I think, when you really look at the day and age we're entering in, it's the user experience that's going to drive where we're going to go in the future. And we can't underestimate that. And creating ways to engage the user even more, readily is going to be based on technology. Technology is an enabler, right? And you start to look at things like, okay, what are people going to do if they're not actually driving their car? Are they, we probably have a little bit of a struggle of people absorbing too much content while they're driving their car, all right? But now that they don't have to drive their car, is that another opportunity for people to absorb content, absorb advertising, to look at other stuff, to control the eyeballs? And while driverless cars are, I think, a bit away, you have to look at that as, are there growth opportunities that technology innovation will drive down the road? And I think driverless cars is probably one example, right? Is there other ways to absorb video through other devices? We talk about the Internet of Things a lot, and ultimately, does that drive? Are you going to get advertisements on your refrigerator as you're opening it that you're out of milk, and by the way, this one's a little cheaper at the store down the block, and if you get there in the next 30 seconds, we'll give you another 40% discount. Are we going to get to that type of content absorption down the road? And the answer is yes. I don't know when, but I think innovation is going to ultimately play a big part of the driving of absorbing of content. And again, absorbing, taking into account the user experience has to be something that they want to do.
Yeah, speaking of that, I remember a couple of years ago at South by, Budweiser was showing up. Again, speaking of every company, it's a technology company. Budweiser had these fridges that would alert you when you were out of Bud, and you could press a button, and an online delivery service would bring you your shipment of whatever Budweiser beer you wanted. They also were testing like electronic billboards on grocery store aisles, so you could get coupons, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
If you just walk by and like, oh, I see you have chips. Do you want to get Budweiser with that? And they were testing some of that technology out.
Yeah, and we talk about big data and we talk about artificial intelligence, and I think we're really on the I would say edge of 2 years ago everybody was talking about big data, but no one really knew what it meant. And now we're starting to see, what does big data mean, right? And how powerful it can be. And ultimately it leads into AI, and it comes into some of those things around not only predicting, or telling somebody when you're out of beer. I got to be careful. I can't mention brand names. Sorry, I almost slipped there. But when you're out of beer, but it predicts down the road. Not only are you going to be out in a week from now, we think based on your current trend that you may go to a light beer. And therefore, we're going to predict that your next order, we're going to give you more of this. And getting into those kind of analytics is really powerful. We're not there yet, right? We're clearly not there yet. But to think about the what ifs is pretty extraordinary, and it's all going to be designed coming back to people are going to have to control the, not control, but they want to get the attention of the user. They want to create that better experience. Why? Because that experience is going to be more valuable. That relationship is going to be really the value driver around the other two elements, players in the drama, which is the content creators and the providers.
So in the report, it said there were 4 main pillars that were driving entertainment and media growth, and that was internet advertising, internet video, video games, and internet access. And I just knowing that but at the same time, it seems that we're starting to reach saturation points in the world, and especially in the U.S. I mean, Netflix is pretty saturated in the U.S. already, although they might argue against that. What do you think it means that these are the 4 main pillars of growth, and what can they do to help increase the growth rate for entertainment and media?
Yeah, it's interesting. When you talk about the business models and you talk about the players, and you talk about the cost of content today, and then you talk about the ability to make money, whether it be advertising or subscriptions, and you really have to start to think we have to do this on a global basis, right? Critical mass is going to be key to driving the business models, and why the content's fairly expensive. I mean, it's expensive to maintain, it's expensive to localize, it's expensive to keep up. And doing so, I think when you think about these larger companies like Netflix or Amazon or some of the others out there, they're really going to look, number one, internet is clearly, going to be, or video demand on internet is going to be a big player, especially as other markets start to emerge. And for them to access that, I think is going to be very important, and you can see a lot of them are driving towards that. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the business model, because that content can even get more expensive down the road if you have to do it in local versions, if you have to adhere to localization requirements, even if you have to store some of the data around who's viewing that content in a specific manner. It's going to drive up the cost of content tremendously. And again, I think it's all going to be drive to make this work. You're going to need critical mass of viewers in order to get the advertising dollars, to maintain that subscription stream at a level that works, right? If you want to go without advertising, that type of stuff. So it's interesting play out down the road, and it's interesting to see that we're and as you mentioned, the pillars, but we're showing flat, to small growth going down the road, but it really doesn't tell the whole story of the shift that's happening within those numbers, right? That we're moving from a TV-dominated, advertising world to a video-on-demand world, and still trying to figure out, is the content going to be a commodity part of it? Is the content going to be a value driver? How is the user going to react to all that? What are they going to be willing to pay for? I think the gaming industry in and of itself has dealt with this for a while, where a shiny new object on a video game, if you don't charge for it and it becomes popular, you've lost out on billions of dollars. If you try to charge for something that they don't want, they will go to the next game very quickly, and you've lost your whole user base. That relationship becomes extraordinarily important.
So speaking of content and this whole idea of the user experience, Netflix is spending $6 billion, I think, this year on content. Amazon is investing heavily, but they're also releasing content differently from how consumers expect traditional TV to air. So they don't have commercials. This whole season comes out. Speaking of the user experience, how is that? Are consumers changing what they expect now from traditional TV because of the popularity of these new disruptive businesses?
I think so. I mean, and if I haven't said it enough, I think we're in the day of the user, right? This is really about, trying to figure out what the user wants, right? And we were chatting a little bit beforehand and having a little fun with it. And I do, on a personal basis, separate the concept of a consumer and a user. A consumer actually pays for content or use. A user has access to it. And I think that's important because I'm a consumer in my household, but I have 5 other users, right? And therefore, they absorb content that I might not be willing to pay for, and distinguishing between the two, I think, is extraordinarily important. But I think at the end of the day, as you talk about the different forms, I don't think there's going to be one trick, right? I think as a user, I want the option. Right? There is some content, I want to go to the movie theaters. I want to sit in a cinema and I want to, okay, I'm a Trekkie, I want to watch the new Star Trek film in a cinema. I'm declaring it. When the next one comes out, I'm going to the movies. Then there's a group of movies that I'm never going to go to the movie theater. It's just not necessarily worth, me spending the money, getting out of the house, where I could do something else. I'll probably watch them at home. I'll download them. And then there's a group of movies that I'll download on my device when I get on a plane, because one, probably my wife doesn't want to watch them, and it's more of a tech thing, and I could absorb that content kind of in and out, and it's not that important to me. But I want that option, right? And I think users at the end of the day are going to want the option to decide what content they want to absorb, where they want to absorb it, and when they want to absorb it. To repeat the TV isn't going away. There are still things that you want to watch on your TV set at home. I think sports is always going to be a big draw, that you want to have that. If you're not at the game, you want to have that in-house experience with your friends and the social connection watching it there. So again, I think what we're driving towards now is a lot of trying to figure out where those boundaries are, understanding that probably you're going to have to offer multiple channels of different content in order to continue to engage the user and the consumer and get the money from the consumer. To get to that critical mass we talked about profitability, and that's where it gets interesting, because that's not a cheap metric, right? And when you get into content and then having to offer it in different bundles or price it different ways, I think for every company that's out there, the concept of changing their entire infrastructure in order to handle maybe microtransactions versus subscriptions, or bill on a different basis. I mean, that's not a cheap thing to do, let alone the cost of the content that goes there. So again, I think we're at an interesting plateau as the model shifts, the user's demanding more, and the change is happening. And I like to say the change is going to happen with the user, not despite the user, right? And we have to pay attention to that user.
So another thing I found fascinating we're seeing these pockets of niche activity, kind of. For example, book sales are up. Amazon just opened their physical bookstore in Columbus Circle here in New York. In addition, physical music sales are still very popular in Japan, as the report showed. They still have a Tower Records, believe it or not. And a couple years ago, I think Billboard had a big feature on how record sales are coming up. I mean, if we're all about the user experience and there's an increase in these industries. I mean, I know they are like older technologies, but should companies chase those consumers, especially because a lot of them skew young?
Back to the future, right?
Yeah.
First of all, I have to say it, I always get excited at the bookstore, and I love going to a bookstore. I was a single dad, and I was raising 2 daughters on my own, and that used to be our thing. We used to go to the bookstore every Saturday night and hang out in there, and we had a great experience with it, right? And one's an English major now in college, and the other is going into law school. So I feel, even looking back, that physical bookstore experience just was so awesome, right? And to hear that a company is thinking about going back into that, I think it just excites me, because, again, it offers up a different user experience. It's ironic, because that same company probably did in the bookstore, right? But now you come into the, well, let's create, now that we have an opportunity, let's create a better user experience. I would think they have bigger plans for this, and who knows if it gets into a VR type of element or an AR or something along those lines. But I think, in that case, it's taking what they have and expanding that user experience. I think, and this gets into the difficulty of the content down the road too, is you do have these niche players, you do have these niche countries. South Africa is big on cinema, right? And it's something cultural within that country that they love going to the movies. That's not going to change. It's always going to be an anomaly in the statistics. Japan loves, the vinyl records. They still like going to the bookstore. It's something in that culture that drives it. And that comes back to the, do you chase the niches or do you chase the masses? And that's a decision companies are going to have to make. And again, knowing that relationship around the niche, it may change overnight. And that's what it comes back to, the technology, full circle, trying to understand the niche today might not be the niche a couple months from now, or if I'm going to go out and produce a bunch of vinyl records, do I really know that that's going to be around a year from now, and I'm not going to be stuck, with a whole bunch of these in my warehouse somewhere that I don't know what to do with, and then you get into the, well, everybody's got to buy a record player too, by the way, because they haven't changed that technology, so but it's fun, and it's something that's predictive. And it's going to be an interesting question to see down the road whether how many people go to the niches, and does that create maybe an opportunity for smaller players in the industry, or do we see an increase? The masses will control the destiny.
Speaking of a niche that's growing right now, the two big industries that you thought were going to grow a lot were esports,
yes,
and VR. I think esports was something like around 24% growth, and by 2021, and but VR, you were expecting something like 7% growth in consumers that have headsets, and these aren't Google Cardboards; these are actual VR headsets. Most of them will be smartphones as well. I mean, that's obviously a growing industry. Is it too early to invest now, though, because it's still really low numbers?
I never like to give investment advice, right? I've been told as an accountant I should never give investment advice, but the reality is, I mean, the growth numbers are definitely there. We're starting from fairly small numbers, so when you talk about these percentages, they're going to be, a little bit out of whack compared to everything else. I think some will take some time. I think the user experience or the UX around virtual reality and VR, it's there, but it's not overwhelmingly defined today. So we're going to have to see the technology develop on that to really get to its true potential. I think it's out there. Do I think we're at the Star Trek level of it yet? No. Will that come down the road? Yes, I think inevitably it will. Do we see some cinemas trying to start to invest into that area? Yes. They might be too early. That's the trick with technology. A little too early, you're dead. A little too late, you're dead. You got to time it right, at the time. So we'll see on that one. Some of the other technologies, we'll see how they play out. I'm not sure, I guess, is what the answer I want to say is. We're just going to have to wait and see how these things come along, how fast, and whether they continue to gather the level of interest that we expect them to. But we don't also know technology-wise what's going to develop on the days. I know I'm watching the clock here. I got a couple people about to raise their hand back there. So.
Well, I did want to bring up something about VR that I've been fascinated about. It's a very solitary experience right now. You're in your headset, you're in your world. I have seen a couple things that I thought were interesting. I went to at Tribeca, kind of did like a VR cafe where different VR experiences set up their own booth, and you can go in and you can go to different booths and experience different VR videos. I've heard of like movie theaters where there's like a signal, everyone has to put on their VR headset at the same time. Obviously you can't walk around or you'll have a mass crowd running into each other. Do you think that's going to limit VR? just because it's so solitary, or is it just a different kind of media now?
I think it's a different kind of media now. I mean, I think right now we're at the beginning stages of the technology around it, and so it's going to be a little bit on the limited UX and limited customer experience. But I think the technology itself will get better, it'll get stronger, it'll get faster, the experience will become more pronounced. And I think in those days, when those days start to come, you'll see, again, coming back to the masses, we'll start to move in that direction for a better user experience around it. Because it will, if it is done in let's say cinemas, then people may go to the movies more because they can have a better experience there. They may change the price point on it. So hopefully some of this stuff starts to produce in the next few years.
Well, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, this has been great. And it's been a pleasure meeting you too. I've really enjoyed some of our conversations before this. So thank you for coming in.
Thank you for speaking today.
All right. So.